Welcome, everybody. Shark Docs here, bringing you stories from the field and to deliver to conservation context from another one of our sites on Netflix's All the Sharks, this time South Africa. So, one of our favorite places to explore underwater and one of the most biologically rich ecoregions in the world, with marine ecosystems ranging from tropical reefs, washed by the warm waters of the Argulas Current, to the cold, nutrient rich kelp forests fed by the Benguela Currents. And so we were diving off of Port Elizabeth for this site on all the sharks where the warm waters and colder waters meet, which made for some excellent diving. And we're chatting here today with our friend, Dr. Alison Kock, who is a fellow shark doc and who is also a marine conservationist from South Africa. And she'll talk to us today about local sharks and rays. And so, among many things, Dr. Koch is a marine biologist whose work translates research findings into actionable biodiversity management strategies and policy interventions to achieve conservation goals. Dr. Koch earned her PhD from the University of Cape Town in 2014. She co-founded the Save Our Seas Foundation Shark Center in South Africa and has served as research manager for Shark Spotters, which we definitely want to hear more about today. And she is currently a marine biologist with SANParks, South African National Parks, with an honorary appointment with the University of Cape Town. She's an active member of many scientific and conservation groups, way too many to talk to her about today, but hopefully we'll get into a few of them. And she's just overall an extraordinary human, and we're very excited to have her with us today.
Thank you very much for having me today.
This is awesome. Brendan?
Yeah, so I want to start by just sharing a little story because Alison came down to Eleuthera. I was working at the Cape Eleuthera Island School. This was maybe 10 years ago. And Alison came down and she gave one of our seminar talks in the evening. And just for context, this is after dinner. This is after high school kids have been out on the water and under the water all day long, including our staff too. Everyone's exhausted. It's hot. There's no air conditioning. We're sweating. There's bugs biting us. We're all crammed into this small room. It's dark. And Alison gives this talk about white sharks and her career and conservation. And every single person in that room was so engaged, wide awake, just completely immersed in your stories, and lit up for days afterwards and very inspired. And so I wanted to start by thanking you because I know you do stuff like this all the time. I think scientists do this all the time, and it's kind of unrecognized in general. And so, you're talking to students, you're talking to the public, you're communicating your science so well. You're always professional and kind and warm and so knowledgeable. And so we're very excited to have you with us here today to hopefully provide some of that conservation context for South Africa. I want to start by asking you a little about your formative years on the water. I've read that you would go out and fish for crayfish, or what we call lobsters, with your dad. And so I'm curious, what about those experiences really stuck with you and maybe ignited your curiosity and passion for our oceans and for sharks and fish and marine life in general?
Well, again, thank you so much for having me. And it's wonderful to chat to the both of you about sharks. And it's such a privilege to be able to do so. So thank you so much for having me. Uh, when I was young, I was really privileged because my father was connected to the ocean. He was in the Navy and he was also a recreational fisherman. And from a young age, he took me out on the boat and diving with him. And when we were catching these rock lobsters or crayfish, we would use these hoop nets and put sardine bait inside of them, lower them down, and then wait for the crayfish to climb in and then haul out the crayfish for a holiday feast. And these catsharks, shysharks, used to also be attracted to the bait inside of the crayfish nets. And so when we pulled them up, they came along with the crayfish net. And I was extremely worried about these sharks because they came up and they curled into a defensive ball. And I was so worried. And my dad said to me that I need to pick up the little shark, kiss it gently on the nose, and then release it back safely into the water. And so that was my experience with sharks. And it really fostered an appreciation for the ocean and appreciation for sharks in particular from a very, very early age.
That is so adorable. I love that. I feel like so many of us in science started in a similar way, having some kind of, one-on-one interaction with wildlife that led us down this path to try to solve some problems with our oceans and the creatures that live there. So that's really cool. And obviously we love the cat sharks. Hopefully they're featured very heavily in the South Africa episode. Um, so, obviously you've come a long way from being out on the boat and seeing these cat sharks for the first time. So throughout your career, has there then been kind of a pivotal moment where you've gone from being really interested in and curious about and loving these animals to then transitioning to more of a research focus and trying to be more of a problem solver actively in the field?
There have been a few pivotal moments. I always wanted to be a marine biologist. From those early years, and my whole career was focused on being a marine biologist. I had a big sign up in my office during high school saying my goal is to be a marine biologist. I went to university, I studied, and it was after university for my 3-year BSc degree where I didn't quite know which direction I wanted to go in. I'd studied for a long time, and I didn't know if I wanted to study further. I didn't know if I wanted to go into tourism or research. And I was very, very lucky to get an opportunity to work on one of the white shark cage diving boats back in 1998. And my very first day, I saw a white shark breach completely out of the water chasing a Cape Fur seal. And at that moment, I was asking all of these questions and nobody had answers to them. And I was arrived. This is my career. This is going back into the science. And I spent about 2 years working on that boat and I made money. And eventually I went back and I picked up the science career again. And I focused on understanding more about the white sharks and why they were leaping out of the air, how often they did it, how fast they did it, what were the seals doing in response to getting away. And the work and the science just grew from that. So that really was a pivotal moment.
No, that's so cool. I've still never seen a white shark breaching. I was happy we didn't see them exhibiting any kind of feeding behavior when we were diving in Port Elizabeth, but someday. That's so cool. And we have a lot of white sharks out here in San Diego as well. And so it's neat I don't know, it seems like, and I think Chris will get into this later, but there are so many lessons from South Africa on the white shark side of things that can be applied to all these other places in the world where they're starting to make a recovery. But man, what a cool start to the career in so many different ways.
I was just gonna say, and we're getting tons of them in Florida now too, right? I mean, I don't know if it's more sightings or more of a recovery, but I mean, the Florida Keys and Jupiter, where we were talking about earlier, we're seeing more and more white sharks in this region as well.
And Port Elizabeth is a really key area for white sharks now. It's increased in the number of white sharks that we're seeing in that area. So I bet you they saw you, even though you didn't see them.
We were worried about that actually. It was like the visibility was not more than 10 or 15 feet, 3 or 4 meters, and it was like we were pretty sure they were out there. We just didn't know, we couldn't see them. For sure they were seeing us.
Yeah, we were definitely hesitant to bring bait with us underwater for that reason. And I did, thinking back, I did notice our dive masters from the local shop were often hanging off like a bit in the distance away from whoever was carrying the bait. So I wonder if that's why.
Makes sense.
Yeah, much smarter than we are. So those stories, I think, really do a nice job of kind of summarizing the extreme ends of like shark biodiversity in South African waters, right? So you guys have, it's such an amazing place because you have something like 20-25% of all shark species on Earth in the country, right? So that's like, I don't know, 550 total species now. So something like 100 plus in South Africa itself, ranging from these little adorable cat sharks to giant white sharks that are breaching, eating marine mammals. And so, Chris mentioned that these currents are coming together. These two oceans are coming together, the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean, and creating for all these unique abiotic factors that lead to lots and lots of biodiversity. And so I was wondering if you could speak to some of the unique ecosystems in South Africa. You guys have the tropical reefs, and then in other parts, you've got really cold water and kelp forests, obviously the sardine run. So could you speak to some of those unique ecosystems and kind of how important South Africa is at the regional and global level for biodiversity of sharks as well as other marine life?
We're incredibly fortunate because we've got a coastline of over 6,000 kilometers, and it extends all the way from Namibia in the north to Mozambique in the east. And we've got the cold currents from the Benguela and the warm ocean currents from the Mozambican Channel and the Gullis Current. And these really create ecosystems that are diverse. And the kelp forests alone house an incredible amount of species. The temperate reefs that you guys were diving on, you've got that little bit of mix of warm and cold water. And we've even got mangroves up in our sort of more eastern east coast KZN coastline as well. And then we've got the shallow coastal environments, estuaries. We've got a lot of productive estuaries along our coastline. And there you get that mix of species that really like that estuarine water. And so it just creates all these unique habitats that you've got these endemic shysharks. And we also mustn't forget the other species of cartilaginous fish. So in South Africa, we've got almost 200 species of sharks, rays, skates, and chimeras. And that, I think, is almost about 20% of the species worldwide. So again, we're one of the most biodiverse areas in the world for sharks, rays, skates, and chimeras. And of course, we've got these sort of niche ecosystems where you've got specialized sharks, rays. But then we've also got these macro predatory sharks. You know, we've got the white sharks, we've got the bull sharks, we've got the tiger sharks. We've got dusky sharks and all these species of shark that enjoy the sardine run. I mean, you can go on the sardine run and you can see black tips and spinner sharks and bull sharks and ragged tooth sharks, and they all go after the sardine run. And that's a really unique event that happens every year in South Africa as well. And then you go offshore, you know, in our pelagic waters, and you've got makos and blues. And if you're lucky, maybe you'll see, other oceanic species like the oceanic white-tip shark that used to be quite abundant, but isn't that abundant anymore. So we really are very, very lucky with the number of species that we have and the reliability of being able to encounter them, not only for research, but also for tourism purposes as well.
I kind of want to pull at this thread we've mentioned a few times. We've talked about cat sharks, obviously from some of your early experiences on the water, and then also some of our favorite species that we saw. So I'm curious, because you mentioned like population reductions of some species like oceanic white tips and, some of these species that are maybe more globally distributed. But for some of these cat sharks, they are endemic, right? So they only occur in South African waters. What's going on in terms of their populations in South Africa? And what are some of the conservation tools? You know, you work at the South African National Park. So like, what are you guys doing to manage the populations and make sure that they're doing all right and stay that way for a long time?
We are so lucky with these endemic cat sharks and shy sharks. We've got, I think, about 10 endemic cat sharks. And also, fortunately, most of them are in fairly healthy status. The populations are doing fairly well. And this is primarily because they're not targeted by commercial fisheries. They are occasionally caught as bycatch, but they're not specifically targeted. And they also, many of them occur inshore. And so we have got a few threatened species. So the Natal shy shark, I don't know if you encountered that one. That one's endangered. The pie-fighter shy shark is also threatened. So, and that's primarily from bycatch in commercial fisheries. So they're not targeted, but they are caught in fairly large numbers in trawl fisheries. But one of the most important tools that we have for these endemic shy sharks that have sort of a more restricted movement and range is marine protected areas. And these marine protected areas really offer a safe space for these endemic sharks to be able to grow and to breed and to reproduce. And so when you're diving in marine protected areas along the South African coast, you will regularly encounter the different shy sharks as well as the different cat sharks. And they're incredibly popular to dive with. Like you said, they will regularly swim up to divers. They're not really afraid. they're busy looking for crabs and small fish and, marine worms and things like that. So they're really not interested in people. They're not, they're not going to harm people. And they're in really high abundance in our marine protected areas where they get this sanctuary. So divers love encountering them, love seeing them, and they're quite charismatic for such a small species because of their shape and their colors. The pajama shy shark, or cat shark, the leopard, they all got these stripes and patterns and spots. And my favorite is the pajama cat shark. It really is one of those species that you just don't expect to come swimming past you. It gets fairly big, so almost a meter in size. And I was so fortunate once to be able to dive and watch it sort of go into a reef and pull out a massive octopus, and to see that kind of thing underwater, it's like really being on safari underwater.
Yeah, what a fascinating thing. I mean, we saw a lot of pajama sharks on the dive, and it's interesting when you start to see something that is commonly observed. You start to get used to it, and then you look for the more rare things. It's just the way the human brain, I think, works. So I think we loved the pajama sharks the entire time we were there. But then we were like, okay, we want to see another pajama or another shy shark, another puff adder shy shark. That was my favorite of the different shark species that we saw. Yeah, so
Those puff-rider shy sharks were the most common species that we used to pull up in the crayfish nets. So I got to know them really well from, 7, 8 years old. So incredibly fortunate to be able to get that experience.
extremely fortunate. Yeah, growing up in rural Wisconsin, I did not get to see some of these cool marine ecosystems. Lake Michigan was the closest thing for me, which is cool in its own right. Um, well, moving away from some of the more diverse, cool endemic species, South Africa is undoubtedly an amazing place. And the more widely, globally recognized shark species, the white shark, which you spent a lot of your career working on, is simultaneously a fascinating species to most, but also feared. And I should probably briefly mention too that in 2022, I think it was, a few years ago, I actually and this is when we met, to tag white sharks and trying to understand where they might be disappearing to from places like False Bay with the advent of all the orca predation. And so there's been this sort of incredible arc in white shark human interaction and also white shark conservation throughout your career, right? And things like the development of tourism, conservation measures, and now the documented predation by orcas of white sharks. So can you walk us through maybe the evolution of what it means for shark tourism in South Africa, and also maybe for the possibility of trophic cascades happening from these orca predation events?
Absolutely. And, to talk about some of that arc, it's been an incredible journey. When I saw my first white shark back in 1998, at the time, nobody cared about sharks. And in fact, most people thought that the only good shark was a dead shark. And to see how that has changed so profoundly over the years to a place where people really have admiration and respect and a much greater understanding of sharks is something that gives one hope for the future and that things can change in a very, very big way very, very quickly. But one of the issues you touched on, which has been another big change, is this disappearance of white sharks from some of these key aggregation areas. So False Bay and Hotspot used to be known as the great white shark capital of the world. People from all over the world used to come and dive with these sharks and see these sharks through the cage diving operations. To now where we haven't had a confirmed white shark sighting in False Bay and increased white shark activity since 2019. So it's been a considerable shift in our thinking, our understanding, and, as scientists trying to better understand what's happened. And it has had a knock-on impact for the tourism operators. One of the positive sides of the tourism now is that other species have filled the niche. So you've got bronze whaler sharks and seven gill sharks that are now coming to those tour boats. And the people from all over the world are now enjoying those different species and interacting with those species. The kelp forests have also become more popular to dive in with those catshark species. And we also have the blue and mako shark diving. So the kind of product has diversified across these different shark species. And in the absence of white sharks, these other species have become bolder. And they never used to approach the boats when the white sharks were there because they'd get eaten. But with the white sharks not there, they are now, interacting with the boats, and people are learning more about the copper sharks, the seven gill sharks, makos and blues. So the cage diving industry has evolved quite considerably to that change. And the ecosystem is also changing quite a lot. So we're already starting to document the impacts on some of these other species. And that includes the bronze whaler sharks, the seven gill sharks, the Cape fur seals, which was one of the important components of the white shark diet. Their behavior is changing quite considerably as well in the absence of white sharks. And this really likely has got this knock-on effect into the ecosystem. And it's not only about the wildlife in the ecosystem, we're also seeing big changes in how people are using the ocean. So increasingly, people are moving down to Cape Town, or they're visiting Cape Town, and they don't have that memory of, having 8 different white sharks at a popular beach and closing the beach temporarily and, reopening it and, having shark warnings. They don't have that. And now we're seeing behavior of, kayakers fishing from kayaks in areas where we would never have seen that before. People swimming across False Bay where we would never have had that before. So people's behavior is changing as well with this extended absence of white sharks. We recently, just a week ago, were very fortunate to learn about some white sharks returning to one of the aggregation areas. And so myself and my colleague Alison rushed up there, and we managed to satellite tag 8 of those white sharks to better understand what will happen if the orcas come back in, and to better understand, where they're moving to. So it's really a dynamic space for science and for research. And, we're still learning. White sharks are probably one of the most well-studied sharks in the world, but we're still learning new things about them. And it keeps us on our toes. We're always on the back foot, but it keeps us busy.
It's incredible, and you obviously have a very rich knowledge of everything happening there because you started your work on white sharks during your PhD, so you've been working on them for a long time. When I was in South Africa with you, you pointed out some of the places where the shark spotters go, and you actually pointed out to me that you would have never normally seen people kayaking through, in False Bay. So, yeah, how has that initiative sort of changed the science of human shark conflict mitigation and public perception?
Shark Spotters at the time really was this pioneering program that was started by local surfers, local fishermen, in a response to this increase back in the early 2000s with a spate of shark bites. And it really was pioneering in the sense that it went, we don't want to use lethal control to try and keep people safer. We want to find a non-lethal solution to keeping people safer, and that way also conserving white sharks at the same time. And so the Shark Spotters program was born from the surveillance provided to people on the cliffs adjacent to some of our popular beaches. And that grew into using science and putting the research program into Shark Spotters, and using the information we were learning about the movement patterns of the sharks, certain times of day, certain conditions where sharks were more prevalent close to shore. And we started to change the narrative around sharks. We shared that information far and wide. all the shark sightings, all the shark research results were shared with the public on a consistent basis. So there was a lot of transparency. And it was this combination of providing a solution that kept people safer by reducing the risk of an encounter, essentially an early warning system for sharks, with the science and the education and awareness and transparency and communication. And that slowly started to change the narrative around sharks. And that program still continues today. So there are white sharks have mainly disappeared from the Cape Town beaches, but our research has also shown that there's been a distributional shift. So we've got other places along the South African coastline where white sharks have increased. So there's quite a lot of shark activity up in Plettenberg Bay, for example, and the Shark Spotters program has expanded to work there. And it also continues to work in Cape Town because in the absence of white sharks, we've got quite big bronze whaler sharks that are coming very, very close to shore. And so for moms and kids, they still want to know when a shark like that is around. And so at some of our key beaches, there are still shark spotters. And I don't work daily in the Shark Spotters program anymore. I serve on its executive committee. But the team that are on the ground are also doing coastal conservation work. They're doing a lot of education and awareness. They're continuing to grow the science to understand what it means when you've got white sharks that are not there, and then also what happens if they come back, because we all hope that they come back. So it's really an evolving and adaptive program. I think that adaptive management is absolutely key in circumstances like this. And Shark Spotters is really at the forefront of being able to listen to what the community wants, to implement what they need, and to change the program where the gap exists. And so I think that's really, really key because a lot of times people shy away from those difficult conversations. And it's also okay to say that you don't have all of the answers. And I think that really is a lesson that one can take not only in other regions where there's shark-human conflict, but, for other species as well, is about effective communication.
Incredible points, and you're so well spoken on these topics. I think people have a lot of lessons to learn from the way that you approach this, not just in South Africa, but you personally seem to be very good at that sort of communication. I find that to be one of the more crippling parts of trying to really have positive messaging around sharks and their role in the ecosystem and how people interact with them. In Florida in particular, there's just a lot of negativity surrounding them, and scientists tend to get very siloed in how they speak. And I've been trying to figure out ways to bridge that gap for a long time, and it can be very difficult. So we appreciate the work that you've done because I think there are lessons to be learned there. And so looking then at the current state of marine conservation in South Africa, it's what gives you hope, and then simultaneously, what might be some emerging concerns for you?
Some of the challenge really is around overexploitation of resources and competing interests in the space. So, trying to balance out conservation needs with socioeconomic needs, trying to balance out areas where you have sanctuaries for sharks and rays and other species to areas where there's a lot of development. There might be mining, for example. So sort of the need for resources create the challenging space and an ongoing situation that we constantly have to work on. And I think that, as one sees some of the resources being declined and seeing them going into decline, you really start to worry about the future. But I do think that there's a lot of hope. And I think that the hope comes from the people that are trying to change this and trying to turn things around and that are doing amazing work on the ground. And so the collaborations that are forming that I'm seeing between government, non-government, academics, industry, local communities, that really gives me hope for developing long-term sustainable solutions to some of the big conservation challenges. And again, it's about communication, and it's about interacting with people, and about giving people a platform and giving people a voice so that they can be heard. And I think that's a big role of what we do in SANParks. Is we often a facilitator with a number of these different projects, particularly around conservation, where we can see the bigger picture and we can get people that have got different views and perspectives and different needs and wants into the same room to try and find, the common ground, to move forward. And I really think the science in South Africa is very, very strong. We've got a lot of very strong systematic conservation planning where we've mapped out important habitats, ecosystems, species, and we really try and use that science to identify key areas in time and space where you can have sort of conservation goals and try and minimize the conflict with other socioeconomic activities. Again, trying to find that balance. It's not easy, and it takes ongoing work. It's not something you can, do once and think it's all going to work from there. You have to consistently stay on it. So people that I work with give me hope. Because that really is the future, and people working together gives me hope as well.
I love that. I think that's the thing that brings us together the most too, and even this conversation today is like, people trying to achieve common goals of conservation and we all have to do it together. It's not a job that for one person or one group. I think partnership and collaboration is the most important thing and the most fulfilling and rewarding for all of us. And that was an awesome point that you made, Dr. Koch. Thank you.
Oh, no, it's a great pleasure. I mean, just with that shark tagging we did last week, we worked together with other scientists, the cage diving operator, a film company, other marine biologists, interns from all over the world to get those satellite tags on. So, talk about making it happen with collaboration.
Yeah, and I mean funding too, like in our nonprofit Ocean First Institute, just funders alone, like, we may not be able to afford all the science as researchers, but people that care about conservation and the efforts they and their contributions to funding things too is a major part of all of the partnership as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it's going to take, what do they say? It takes a village.
Takes a village. Many villages, probably a global village.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with us today. I just want to direct people to some resources. We're going to annotate this talk in the comment section below the YouTube video with references to basically everything we've said today. So we'll direct folks to your research papers. I really encourage people to go straight to the source. We'll put the link to your Google Scholar. They can check out your Instagram page at Alison_Kock as well. There's a lot of filters that typically go in between the actual science and what people learn and understand about our oceans or really any field of science. And so, just encouraging people to go straight to the scientific literature themselves if they're interested in more or to just understand and see how the research actually translates into some of the things that you're talking about, because you've done so much work and published so many papers that kind of just lay out this trail of breadcrumbs, right? As we learn one thing and then the next and then the next, and it takes years and years, and it does take this whole village. And so I think it's really cool to see that whole trail and progression of knowledge going from, asking all these questions on the boat when you first saw that white shark breach and no one having answers. And now throughout your entire career, you've provided so many of those answers. So thank you so much. And we will hopefully be at the next location soon, chatting from, I don't know, Japan or the Maldives or something. We'll pick some new backgrounds. So thanks, everybody.
All right, thank you.